The auction hall was thick with the scent of old wood and sorrow. No one noticed the quiet man sitting in the very back row. All eyes were fixed on the limping German shepherd beneath the spotlight, the metal plate on his collar still engraved with the words K9 Max. A dog who was once a hero, now treated like discarded machinery. The room was utterly silent. Next up, a retired K9 injured in the line of duty, the auctioneer's voice echoed. But no one moved. Not a single hand rose. Starting bid, $100, he called again. Still nothing. No one wanted him. Come on, folks, this one saved lives, the man urged, forcing cheer into his tone. Waste of money, someone muttered. The dog lowered his head. His ears drooped in quiet surrender, as if he already knew his fate. I'll take him. From the back row, a man in a faded military jacket placed a hand on the wheelchair beside him, where his young son sat, his homemade wooden prosthetic arm resting across his lap. The man's voice was low, steady, and final. No one knew why he did that, but what happened next left everyone in the hall speechless. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I'm truly curious to see how far our stories travel. It began on a winter afternoon when the sky pressed low over Cedar Falls, a quilt of gray that swallowed the sun. The streets were thinly veiled in melting snow, every storefront shut, every shadow still. The kind of day when even hope seemed to move slower. At the edge of the square stood a fading brick building with a hand-painted sign. City auction, government property, one day only. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of damp wood, coffee gone cold, and the quiet ache of things left behind. Rows of folding chairs faced a small wooden stage lit by one flickering bulb. Beneath that light stood a German shepherd, motionless but trembling, his coat mottled with scars, his badge tag catching flashes of gold beneath the dust. K9 Max. He was 7, maybe 8, the kind of age where muscle turns memory. One hind leg dragged slightly with each shift of weight, but his stance remained proud, the last habit of a soldier who never forgot how to stand at attention. The auctioneer, a man with thinning hair and the weary cheer of someone who sold everything but dignity, cleared his throat. Next up, a retired K9 injured in the line of duty. His words bounced off the pale walls and fell flat. Excellent obedience record, explosives detection, 7 years of service. Then he hesitated, glancing at the limp. Minor injury to the hind leg. The room answered with a ripple of laughter too soft to hide cruelty. Can't even run, someone whispered. Another voice followed. Who'd want that? Max's ears twitched. He didn't understand the words, but he understood their rhythm, the tone of dismissal. His gaze fell to the floorboards where the light circled him like a small arena of defeat. The auctioneer tapped his notes again. Starting bid, $100. The microphone squealed. The silence that followed was deep, heavy, and final. 80? He tried. 50? Still nothing. The air thickened around them, thick enough to taste. And then, before the gavel could fall, a voice rose from the back. I'll take him. It wasn't loud, but it carried. Heads turned. The crowd parted just enough for the source to come into view. A tall man sitting in the last row, posture straight, eyes calm. His jacket was military issue, olive green, the edges frayed from years of wear. His name was Raymond Cole, a veteran who had learned to speak softly because the world had already shouted enough. His jaw was rough with stubble, his expression unreadable. Beside him sat a boy, 8 years old, thin as winter sunlight. Samuel, his son, pale skin, dark hair curling against his forehead. He sat in a simple wheelchair, small hands folded neatly in his lap. One of them was wooden, hand-carved, the grain polished smooth by time. It rested across his knees like something between burden and badge. The auctioneer blinked, thrown off script. "Sir, the starting bid is 100. I said I'll take him," Raymond replied, voice low but certain. It was not a bid. It was a promise. The gavel hovered. The man on the stage hesitated, his professional rhythm breaking. For a moment, no one seemed to remember what the rules were when Mercy entered the room. Then came the dull thud of wood against wood. "Sold," the auctioneer said, almost whispering it, as if afraid to disturb the quiet that had settled. No applause followed. No congratulations. Only the scrape of Raymond's boots against the wooden floor as he stood and began to move forward. The chair wheels creaked beside him, each turn deliberate, slow. The sound of metal and wood filled the hall, steady, rhythmic, like the heartbeat of something returning to life. The dog's ears lifted, his head turned, drawn toward that sound. The soft click of the boy's wooden arm brushing the rim of the chair. Raymond stopped at the foot of the stage. Max looked up, eyes meeting the veteran's for the first time. In those eyes, there was no pity, only recognition, the kind that passes between two creatures who have both known duty and loss. Raymond extended a hand, scarred and sure, and for a moment the hall disappeared. No audience, no rules, no price. Only a man and a dog standing at the thin line between what was broken and what could be made whole again. From the corner, someone whispered, "He's crazy." Another muttered, "Poor kid." But Raymond didn't hear them. He reached for the leash and gave a single nod to the auctioneer. The man handed it over like an apology. The veteran turned, pushing the wheelchair toward the exit. The boy glanced over his shoulder once, his gaze meeting the dog's. Outside, the world was changing color. Snow had begun to fall again, soft and unhurried. The first flakes caught in the boy's dark hair, on Raymond's jacket, and along the dog's fur. The air smelled of pine and smoke, the scent of a world that didn't care about medals or markets. Behind them, the door closed, and the muffled noise of the hall faded to nothing. They walked slowly down the steps. Raymond's breath hung in the cold. The dog limped beside them, unsure, hesitant, but following. Samuel sat quietly, watching the animal's uneven gait. His wooden hand rested in his lap, catching snowflakes that melted into dark streaks of water. When he reached the bottom step, he lifted that hand slightly, hesitant, awkward, as though he wasn't sure if the dog would understand. Max paused. His head tilted. His tail gave a single uncertain flick. The light from the doorway stretched across the snow, framing them in a thin band of gold. For the first time, Max raised his head, ears twitching toward the boy's wooden hand. By the time they reached the cabin, night had gathered its full weight. The road behind them was nothing but a thin scar through the snowbound forest, each turn swallowed by drifting white. Pines bowed under frost, their branches whispering in the dark. In the bed of the truck, Max lay curled against an old tarp, his breath shallow, rising in small plumes that vanished before they reached the cold air. Every jolt of the tires brought a faint whine. From the back seat, Samuel watched him through the glass, his good hand clutching the edge of the seat, his wooden one resting still, as if afraid to break the quiet between them. The cabin sat at the edge of a frozen ridge, half buried in snow, its chimney sending up a lonely thread of smoke. When the truck stopped, the headlights cut across the drifts, revealing a world that seemed to have stopped breathing. Raymond stepped out first, boots sinking into the crusted white. He opened the back and lifted the tarp gently, his scarred hands moving with a kind of carefulness that belonged to people who'd broken things before. "Easy, boy," he murmured. Max stirred but didn't resist. Together they carried the dog inside, the veteran leading, the boy following close behind, dragging faint tracks of snow across the floorboards. The cabin's warmth met them like an old friend who had forgotten how to smile. Firewood crackled in the stove, its orange light spilling across the room, painting the walls in shades of rust and gold. Max was laid upon a wool blanket near the hearth. His breathing steadied, though his leg trembled when he tried to move. Raymond fetched a basin of warm water and a frayed cloth. Samuel watched from the chair by the window, his eyes wide and silent as his father knelt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, wiping away the dirt and blood from the dog's wound. The scar tissue along Raymond's knuckles caught the firelight, the small tremors in his hands betraying both age and memory. "You'll be all right," he said softly, though no one could tell if the words were meant for Max or himself. Outside, the wind keened through the pines, but inside, the world had settled into a fragile rhythm. Samuel began to draw, his small notebook balanced on his knees, pencil scratching faintly against the page. He sketched the shape of Max's ears, the slope of his nose, the rise and fall of his chest. The boy's eyes softened with every line. Across the room, Raymond stitched an old saddle strap, glancing up now and then toward the sleeping dog. The firelight made them look almost like a family framed in amber, one mending, one imagining, one healing. Days passed this way, marked not by words, but by the soft cadence of routine. Snow deepened outside, and the sky never quite cleared. Raymond worked on his gear near the stove, his face half hidden behind the rising steam of his coffee. Samuel drew by the window, occasionally looking up when Max hobbled across the room. The dog moved like a ghost relearning how to live, each step cautious, as though the floor might vanish beneath him. Sometimes he paused beside the boy's chair, nostrils flaring at the scent of graphite and wood. The boy would smile faintly, not daring to move. These were the small miracles that winter allowed, quiet, uncertain, but real. On the fifth night, a storm rolled in from the valley. The wind hit the cabin like surf against stone, shaking the windows in their frames. Thunder cracked somewhere beyond the ridge, its echo crawling through the rafters. Raymond was asleep in his chair when a small sound pulled him awake. Not thunder, not wind, but a low breath beside the boy's bed. He rose slowly, every movement deliberate, and in the flickering firelight saw the outline of Max lying there, his head resting on the edge of Samuel's blanket. The boy's wooden hand hung limp over the side, and Max's muzzle pressed against it as though testing its warmth. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Samuel stirred, opening his eyes and smiled, a small, hesitant thing that glowed brighter than the fire itself. It was the first smile Raymond had seen in months. Lightning flashed across the room, bright and sudden, throwing their shadows high against the walls. In that instant, Raymond's gaze caught on the tag hanging from Max's collar. The metal glinted white, the engraving clear now in the light's brief flare. Property of RCPD, Officer Och Vance. The smile on his face faltered. He knew that name. The storm outside grew louder, but inside silence fell again. Deeper this time, heavier, the kind that comes when the past finds its way home. Morning came without sound. The snow had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the world wrapped in pale stillness. Light crept across the cabin floor, tracing the shape of Max's body near the cold ashes of the fire. Raymond sat by the window, his coffee untouched, eyes fixed on the dog. The collar tag glinted faintly in the weak sun, and the name engraved there echoed in his chest, like an old wound reopening. Harold Vance. The name he had buried long ago beneath layers of silence and service medals. Raymond's last mission before the discharge, an ambush outside the border town, a storm of gunfire and smoke. Vance had been his partner, the kind of officer who could laugh in the middle of chaos, who believed every man deserved saving. And Max, this same dog, had been his. The memory came uninvited. Vance shouting orders, Max sprinting ahead into the dust, the air turning red and deafening. When it ended, Raymond had been pulled from the rubble, half deaf, his leg torn by shrapnel. Vance never made it out, and somewhere in that desert ruin, a part of Raymond had stayed behind with him. Now, years later, the ghost had a nameplate and lay sleeping by his stove. Raymond ran his thumb along the rim of his mug, eyes still on Max. He could almost see Vance again, tall, broad-shouldered, face smeared with dust, grinning beneath the weight of exhaustion. "We'll make it home, Ray," he'd said. But only one of them did. The guilt settled back into his bones, heavy and familiar. Max stirred, opening one amber eye, and for a fleeting second it felt as though Vance himself was looking back. Wordless, waiting. Raymond set his cup aside and crossed the room. He crouched near the dog, brushing his fingers against the cold metal tag. "You were there," he murmured. The dog's ear twitched. "You dragged him out, didn't you?" Max's tail moved once, barely. It wasn't an answer, but it didn't have to be. Raymond exhaled slowly, the air trembling between regret and reverence. This dog, broken and discarded, had carried his partner's body through hell, and all these years later, he had carried the truth back to him. That afternoon, the world outside brightened but did not warm. Samuel sat near the table, sketching in the faint light, while Raymond dug through a battered trunk of papers and old precinct files. He found a box of envelopes, yellowed, edges curled, each stamped RCPD Archive. He leafed through them until he found the report. Officer Harold Vance, KIA, Operation Echo Ridge. K9 Unit Max, deemed unfit for duty due to trauma and physical injury. Asset retired. The word unfit burned like accusation. He read it again, then again, as though the ink might change. "Unfit," he whispered, "after saving him." He leaned back, rubbing his temples. Behind him the fire cracked softly, indifferent. By evening, the wind had begun to stir again, thin at first, then building into a restless howl. Raymond sat by the hearth, staring into the flames. He had spent a lifetime learning to quiet ghosts, but this one had come home wearing fur and scars. Across the room, Samuel lay under a quilt, asleep, his sketchbook still open beside him, a half-finished drawing of Max by the fire. The dog himself lay near the door, ears half raised, eyes following the shifting glow. Every sound seemed to find him first. The sigh of wind through the cracks, the creak of old beams. He lifted his head, listening. Raymond noticed. "It's all right," he said quietly. "Just the storm moving in." But Max didn't settle. His muscles tightened, nose twitching. The low rumble in his throat wasn't fear. It was recognition. Samuel stirred, blinking awake. "Dad?" he murmured. Raymond crossed to his side, hand resting on the back of the chair. "Go back to sleep, son." But Max stood now, his body rigid, eyes locked on the window. Lightning flashed across the ridge, followed by the roll of thunder, slow, heavy, deliberate. Raymond turned toward the sound, instinct rising old and sharp. The firelight flickered over his face, drawing out the lines of worry carved there long before this night. He reached for his coat, the old military one, and glanced once more at Max, who stood at full attention, tail straight, ears forward, every nerve alive. Then came the sound, the crunch of tires on frozen ground. Headlights cut through the curtain of snow, white beams slicing across the window panes. A truck idled in the clearing beyond the fence, engine rumbling low, too steady to be lost. Raymond's jaw tightened. There were no neighbors for miles. He moved toward the window, eyes narrowing, the glow of the fire catching on the metal badge still lying beside his coffee cup. Outside, the storm swirled harder, and Max began to growl. The past had come looking for him again, and this time it had headlights. The knock came just after dawn, soft and measured, like someone who had practiced being polite. Raymond had been sitting at the table, oiling the hinge of an old rifle that hadn't seen light in years. The storm had died, but its silence lingered. Snow pressed against the windows in pale mounds. When the sound came again, 3 taps, evenly spaced, Max rose before he did, ears forward, body stiff, the low rumble in his throat more warning than greeting. Raymond opened the door halfway. The cold spilled in first, followed by a man wrapped in a tailored coat the color of wet asphalt. His hat was neat, his boots spotless despite the snow. Captain Ellis. The years had softened his edges but sharpened his eyes. He was in his 50s now, clean-shaven, with hair trimmed to regulation even though no one was left to enforce it. A silver badge gleamed on his lapel, a different kind of service now, one that smelled of offices and campaign promises. His smile was small, polished, and empty. "Raymond," he said, voice warm in tone but cold underneath. "It's been a long time." Raymond said nothing, only stepped aside enough for the man to enter. The firelight caught the shine of Ellis's badge as he brushed snow from his shoulders. "You've got a quiet place here," Ellis said, glancing around the cabin like someone inspecting a relic. His gaze paused on Max, who stood near the stove, muscles tense. "I hear you have one of our old K9s. Raymond's jaw worked once, then stilled. "We'll take him back," Ellis added, still smiling. "He's not yours anymore," Raymond said. His voice was calm, but the words landed like stone. Ellis's expression didn't change, though his eyes cooled a shade. "That dog carried classified tags," he said. "Still belongs to the city, to the department, and to certain people who don't want old stories resurfacing." He ran a gloved finger along the edge of the table, inspecting the dust as though searching for history. "You understand, of course. It's not about you. It's about keeping things clean." Raymond leaned against the counter, arms folded. "You mean quiet?" Ellis's gaze lifted, sharp now. "You always were good at reading between the lines." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Let it go, Ray. Vance's file is closed. It has been for years." "Closed because you said so?" Raymond's tone cracked the air. For a moment the mask slipped from Ellis's face, revealing something harder beneath. Then the politician's calm returned. "We all did what we had to," he said softly. "You, me, Vance, even the dog." He turned toward Max, who hadn't moved. His amber eyes locked on the stranger like he remembered him too. Ellis adjusted his coat, the gesture crisp, rehearsed. "He'll be picked up tonight. Keep him inside until then. It'll be easier for everyone." He reached for the door, then paused with one hand on the frame. "And, Ray, don't go digging. The people who signed those reports still have long memories. Raymond didn't answer. The wind pushed at the door as Ellis stepped outside, his polished boots sinking into the snow. The truck waited at the end of the path, engine idling, tail lights glowing red through the mist. Raymond watched as it disappeared down the hill, the sound fading into the trees until there was nothing left but the low hiss of wind and the steady crackle of fire. Inside, the air felt heavier. Samuel sat up from the couch, eyes still fogged with sleep. "Who was that?" he asked. "Someone from before," Raymond replied. He crossed to the window, hand resting on the cold frame. Max stood beside him, body coiled tight, gaze fixed on the trail of tire marks cutting through the snow. "Easy, boy," Raymond murmured. But the dog didn't relax. His ears flicked toward the door as if expecting the knock to return. Raymond turned away and began checking the locks, one after another. The old soldier's instinct moved through him like muscle memory. Curtains drawn, rifle cleaned, the generator checked. Outside, the sky had darkened again, though the day was barely half born. Snow drifted across the porch in lazy spirals, covering Ellis's footprints before the wind could scatter them. By dusk, the storm had returned. Raymond sat by the fire, the rifle across his knees, the weight of old guilt pressing down. Samuel dozed on the couch, sketchbook still open on his chest. Max lay near the door, silent, watchful, his gaze flicking between the window and the shadows beyond. The world outside had turned to blur, a gray curtain of snow swallowing every trace of the road. Then a sound, small, metallic, broke through the hush. Samuel stirred first, swinging his legs over the side of the couch. "Dad," he whispered, pointing toward the door. Raymond rose slowly, his joints stiff, his breath visible in the flickering light. He opened the door a crack, scanning the porch. The snow blew sideways, fine as dust, but near the steps something caught the glow of the lantern. He stepped closer. There, half buried in the fresh powder, was a brass shell casing, clean, bright, and still warm to the touch. It began before dawn, the kind of darkness that feels older than morning, when wind turns sharp enough to whisper through the cracks. Raymond woke to the sound of glass breaking, a single crash, then another. He reached for the rifle out of instinct, his hand steady though his breath quickened. Samuel stirred in the cot beside the stove, eyes wide and unsure. "Stay low," Raymond murmured. "Don't move unless I tell you." The words came from the soldier in him, the part that never really retired. The door splintered inward, snow and shadow rushing in together. Two men, faces hidden behind black scarves, boots heavy with ice, stormed into the cabin. They moved with purpose, their voices clipped, impatient. "Find the files!" one barked, overturning a chair. Papers scattered like frightened birds across the floor. The other kicked open the chest near the wall, cursing. The fire threw their shapes across the room, jagged, monstrous. Raymond stepped between them and the boy, the rifle raised but angled low, buying seconds that felt like hours. Samuel crouched behind the stove, the faint glow of embers flickering against the wooden frame of his prosthetic arm. The sound of his shallow breathing blended with the hiss of the storm outside. Max, who had been asleep near the door, rose slowly. The limp that had marked every step for months was gone now, swallowed by something older, sharper. His hackles rose, breath quick and focused. Raymond caught the change too late. The dog lunged. The first man never saw it coming. A flash of fur, the sound of teeth on flesh, and the gun clattered to the floor. Max drove him back against the wall, the full force of memory surging through him. The same instincts that once saved lives now returned with purpose. The second intruder swung his weapon up, eyes wide. Raymond moved before he could think. The butt of the rifle connected with the man's wrist, a crack cutting through the chaos. The gun fired once, wild, tearing into the ceiling before falling silent. Then everything stopped. The storm outside raged on, but inside the world had gone still. The first man lay groaning, clutching his arm. The second tried to crawl toward the door, leaving a trail in the spilled ashes. Raymond stood over them, chest heaving, the old rhythm of combat still pulsing through him. "You're done," he said quietly. The words didn't need to be louder. He kicked the gun away and turned to Samuel. "You okay?" The boy nodded, voice caught in his throat. But when Raymond looked toward the door, his heart froze. Max was down. The dog lay half in the snow, half in the cabin's light, his chest rising in shallow, uneven bursts. A streak of red spread beneath him, dark against the white. Raymond dropped beside him, pressing a hand against the wound. "Hold on, buddy," he whispered, voice breaking. Samuel crawled closer, his small wooden hand resting gently on Max's neck. The touch was awkward, imperfect, but it steadied the trembling dog more than any words could. Outside, sirens began to wail in the distance, a thin, wavering sound cutting through the wind. Raymond exhaled hard, relief and exhaustion tangling together. He tied the intruder's hands with rope, his movements sharp, automatic. One of them muttered something about Ellis, but Raymond already knew. The captain had sent them. It wasn't about the dog. It was about the truth buried beneath his collar. When the flashing lights finally cut through the dawn, the sheriff's truck came grinding up the hill, tires crunching over the frozen earth. Sheriff Hannah Coleridge, a woman in her late 40s with a lined face and a stare that missed nothing, stepped out first. She was broad-shouldered, hair tied back beneath her hat, voice steady even in surprise. "Cole," she called, eyes sweeping the scene. "You all right?" Raymond nodded, motioning to the two men slumped against the wall. "Ellis's people," he said, "looking for something that's not theirs." While the deputies cuffed the intruders, Raymond turned back to Max. The dog's eyes fluttered open at the sound of his name. His tail moved once, faint but deliberate. "Stay with me," Raymond said. Then his hand brushed against the dog's collar, and something clicked. Inside the worn leather lining, beneath the rusted tag, a faint metallic glint caught his eye. He pried it loose carefully, revealing a tiny capsule no larger than a fingernail. It wasn't a tag at all. It was a data chip. He slipped it into his palm, heart pounding. Later, as the sun began to climb behind the ridge, Sheriff Coleridge returned from the patrol car, her breath visible in the cold. "Ellis is in custody," she said. "Turns out your hunch was right. That chip's got mission logs, correspondence, the whole cover-up." She looked at him for a long moment. "You just cleaned the house, Cole." Raymond nodded, though his gaze was elsewhere, fixed on the limp body by the fire. The room was quiet now, the chaos already fading into the rhythm of crackling wood and slow breathing. Samuel knelt beside Max, tears carving lines through the dust on his cheeks. "He's gonna make it, right?" he asked. Raymond hesitated, then placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "He's a fighter," he said softly, but his voice wavered. Outside, the sirens faded, swallowed by the wind. Inside, light spilled across the floor, golden and trembling. Max's breathing grew slower, each rise of his chest more fragile than the last. Raymond bent close, his whisper almost lost to the morning. Hold on, buddy. The dog's eyes flickered once, then closed. Morning came like a slow mercy. Days had folded into one another since the shooting, time dissolving into the rhythm of machines and quiet prayers. The vet clinic smelled of antiseptic and snowmelt. Its windows were fogged, the world outside reduced to shapes and silence. Raymond sat by the metal table, elbows on his knees, hands clasped so tight the knuckles blanched white. Samuel dozed in a chair nearby, his wooden arm resting across his lap, his head tilted toward the sound of the steady monitor. Each soft beep a fragile promise that Max was still here. The German shepherd lay wrapped in blankets, his sable coat shaved and stitched, chest rising shallow but steady. Every now and then, his paw twitched as though chasing ghosts in his sleep. The vet, Dr. Lena Carver, a calm, weathered woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and soft eyes behind her glasses, moved quietly around them, checking the monitors. "He's strong," she said softly. "If he made it through the night, he'll make it through the week." Raymond nodded, unable to speak. Gratitude and fear tangled somewhere behind his ribs, too heavy to voice. When she handed back the collar later that week, its metal tag gleamed under the fluorescent light. Someone, maybe the sheriff, maybe Samuel, had polished it until the old scratches vanished. The new engraving read, K9 Max, Guardian of the Cole family. Raymond turned it over in his palm, thumb tracing the words. For years, the collar had carried secrets and silence. Now, it carried belonging. When he fastened it gently around Max's neck, the dog stirred, tail giving one small thump against the table. Raymond smiled for the first time in days. "Welcome home, soldier," he whispered. Weeks passed, and spring began to edge timidly through the mountain cold. Snow receded into the gullies, replaced by patches of mud and the shy green of new grass. The town's precinct, small, brick-faced, with a single flagpole out front, announced a ceremony in honor of courage beyond duty. Chairs lined the courtyard. Veterans, officers, townsfolk, they gathered beneath the wide Montana sky as the sheriff stepped forward, papers trembling slightly in her gloved hands. Hannah Coleridge's voice carried steady through the afternoon chill. "For reminding us that loyalty never retires," she read, "and for proving that courage wears more than one uniform." Max stood between Raymond and Samuel, harness clean, chest bandaged beneath the leather. He was thinner now, but proud, eyes bright beneath the sunlight. When Samuel wheeled forward, his small hand holding the medal, the crowd fell silent. The boy leaned in, fastening it to Max's harness with careful precision, his wooden fingers clumsy but sure. The metal caught the sun, flashing gold against fur. Max's tail moved once, then again, slow, deliberate, steady as a heartbeat. The sound of it tapping the ground drew a quiet laugh from the crowd, and more than a few tears. After the ceremony, people came to shake Raymond's hand, to thank him, to thank the dog. But he barely heard them. His gaze was on Samuel, on how the boy's eyes lifted for the first time without fear. The child who once hid behind the stove now sat upright in his chair, sunlight catching the curve of his smile. For the first time in a long while, Raymond saw the future not as a burden, but as something unfolding gently before them. As the sun began to dip behind the hills, the crowd thinned. The flag lowered, and the day softened into gold. Raymond, Samuel, and Max remained near the edge of the field, the three of them outlined against the fading light. Raymond placed a hand on his son's shoulder and another on the dog's head. "They saved me," he murmured. "Both of them." His voice trembled, not with grief but with the fullness of being alive. The horizon burned faintly orange, a last flare of warmth before night. The wind carried the smell of pine and dust, the same scent that had once filled the cabin where it all began. The world felt whole again, even with its scars. Samuel reached down, brushing Max's ear, and the dog turned, pressing his head against the boy's knee. And as the last light slipped behind the mountains, something unspoken held them there. One man, one child, one dog, and the quiet grace of having survived together. Some bonds, Raymond thought, aren't forged by blood or battle, but by the choice to stay when everyone else walks away. Some stories don't end when the mission does. They linger, soft as breath, steady as a heartbeat in the lives they touch. Maybe that's what courage really is. Not the loud moment of battle, but the quiet decision to keep showing up, even when no one's watching. When I think of Raymond, Samuel, and that old K9, I think about how loyalty can take the shape of silence, of waiting, of refusing to give up on someone who's already halfway gone. The world is full of men and dogs like them, unseen, uncelebrated, still guarding what's good in ways we'll never know. Sometimes, the quietest hearts carry the loudest courage, and when the noise fades, after the storms, after the losses, it's their kind of light that stays. Not blazing, not brief, but warm enough to remind us we're not alone. So tonight, wherever you are, pause for a moment. You might just hear it, the sound of someone still standing watch, still believing, still here. If stories like this remind you of the strength that still lives quietly in the world, consider subscribing and staying with us for the next one. Until then, may your nights be calm, your heart steady, and your light never fade.